Yeah, I couldn't wait. Hey, it's Romania Black, and no, after that last episode, and Oculus, and the black-haired girl, and what is Decim planning? I don't know. And Mayu, I couldn't wait. No, it's the final episode of Death Parade, and I just need to know what happens. I'm not sad yet because we still have the audio drama that I'm going to be doing the next day when this posts on Patreon. The following day, this is going to post on Saturday. The following day, Sunday, there's going to be the audio drama. And then the following week, it's going to be on YouTube. And then the week after that, we're going to do a live stream. So I'm going to wait till this final episode and the audio drama post on YouTube, so everybody on YouTube can see. And then that following week, we'll do we'll do a live stream to talk about this series. And by that point, hopefully I'll have seen everybody's comments and we can talk about questions and comments and things in the live stream itself. That'll give us a lot to talk about. But I don't know. I don't know how they're going to end this show. I mean, we've gotten Chiyuki's backstory at this point, so we know her backstory. We know her committing suicide. And we know that Decim is like, I feel like Decim doesn't want to let her go. He doesn't want to judge her. He doesn't want her to get reincarnated. Or maybe he's figured out that none of them get reincarnated. They all go to the void. Maybe that's it. Maybe nobody gets reincarnated and they all go to the void. I don't know. I'm just like, wait, what is happening? The last episode, I was like, what is going on? So, I don't know. The last episode left me with a lot of questions, like the unreliable narrator part of it. Has what Decim has been told, is that really true? Because when we see the face switch to the evil face on the elevator, do they all get sent to the void? Is that just how this goes? Does no one get reincarnated? I feel like this episode has to answer a lot of questions in a very short amount of time and give us some resolution, and that makes me horrifically worried because I'm like, I really liked this series a lot. I've really been pleased with it, but I don't know where in the world what they're going to do at this point. I don't know how they're going to wrap things up. And then obviously the audio drama may give us some supplemental stuff to end on, which would be great. At least give us some more Chiyuki and Decim moments, maybe, if anything. But I'm like, how are they going to end this? I don't know. So that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at right now. I'm in a state of worry and not knowing what's going to happen. So it's a fun time. It's a fun place to be at, right? I do want to go ahead and give a shout out to our patrons over on Patreon in our philanthropy tier because they've been awesome. A special shout out to these individuals, all of Patreon, YouTube. Thank you guys so much for your support. I greatly appreciate it. But a special shout out to Edgar, to Nameless Monster, to Dana, to Tyrone, to Anime Annie, to Be Happy, to Shimoyama, to Eric, to Sunspots, to Translucent Men, as well as Alex Cornejo, Kuba Lutek, Lude Genesis, as well as Librarian of Lang, Isabel, Truck, and Kiri. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate y'all. Thank you for supporting me, and as I dive into shows like these and coming to the end of it. So when it's a 12-episode series, it seems like it goes by way too fast. So what can we do? But hopefully the internet works a lot better, knock on wood, than last week, and hopefully my dogs and everybody are complacent during this. But yeah, I've got somewhere to be this evening, so I was like, I'm not gonna wait. I'm gonna go ahead and watch this, and we'll just see what we get. So we're gonna start the final episode of Death Parade, episode 12, and we're gonna do that here in 3, 2, 1. Let's do this, Lars. I'm really sad that it's over now. Oh, this was such a good series, and man, of course they'd have to end it on like a kind of a non-ending where there's still obviously stuff happening beyond this series, but I like that they kind of leave it open where if they wanted to ever do a sequel series, if they wanted to do Death Parade Season 2, they could leave it open and carry on the story if they wanted to. I kind of like that because what I was afraid was going to happen, what I was afraid was going to happen was that it was going to be like a number 6 kind of situation. If you've not seen number 6, it's an anime and a manga. And the situation with that is that it originally was a manga and the anime finished before the manga did. And so the ending of the anime is notoriously different than the manga and also rushed. And I remember reading watching the anime for it and being like, the last episode, I was like, what the hell is going on? And then you read the manga and you're like, oh, okay. So I know this is anime original, but I had the fear that what was going to happen was that we were going to get to the ending of this episode and they were going to try to wrap everything up, or like, I was afraid this was going to have a bad ending, honestly. I had the fear it was going to have a bad ending and that Oculus was going to do something crazy and like kill everybody, and that was going to be the end of it, and it was going to be like, I had a feeling it was going to be like a Devilman Crybaby or really sad ending, and we were going to be like, oh my God, and it was going to be very doom and gloom and nihilistic, but instead it's not. Instead it's not, and I'm really glad for that. I'm glad that Oculus is like pondering the meaning of life now and all these existential questions, and Nona and Queen and Castra are still like figuring out what to do afterwards. Like, the show leaves it open to have an extra season because it doesn't give us the full resolutions with Ginty's character, with Decim and the others, which I could see some people complaining about, but I like that it leaves it a little bit open. We got this whole season was about Chiyuki's story and her. What I loved about it was kind of, Chiyuki was the fish out of water to start out the series. And then she goes through and figures out through these trials of other humans, like kind of the meaning of life. And it has to happen because she's the one that threw her life away by committing suicide. So it seems only fitting that she spends the season, in the entire series and season, kind of figuring out that, yeah, life is worth living. And then her final test is confronting her own death. And the thing about it is, there was a part of me that knew the entire time, like, this is her final test, right? But I was on pins and needles the whole time because I was like, if she presses that damn button, he's going to have to send her to the void because he's going to have to send her to the void because that's not what you should do, right? She did the opposite of Mayu. Mayu chose to sacrifice the guy to save Harada. She chose to sacrifice him, and she was happy with that choice. That was kind of the thing that was so confusing about the last episode, is that she made the choice to sacrifice someone and was fine with that choice, and she got sent to the void. She got sent to the void just like Harada. And the thing of it is that that was her choice. She was happy with it, and she's like, I'm okay with that. But that's why she got sent to the void, was because she sacrificed somebody else. She just justified it in the moment. Ginty's like, whatever. But in this scenario, I like that we get poor Mayu, but I like that we get Chiyuki having the opposite happen, where she makes the decision. And it takes her the entire episode to articulate why she can't sacrifice the life. And man, it's like everything that happens, you're just like, it's justifiable why she would press that button. And we, the audience, know that if she presses the button, she's going to the void. But it's so obvious that it would be a choice that any of us would make. Like, that's kind of the thing, is like, you know, any of us put in that situation could make that choice. But the point of the episode is to show you why you shouldn't. And I like that it's not preachy at all. It's just her saying, I've met all of these people who either would have liked to have had the chance to come back to life, or they sacrificed themselves because they knew there were people they had to save. And there are people up top that they didn't want their deaths to be in vain. So that's why they made those sacrifices. And she's like, if I press this button and take someone's life, what if it, because she asked, you know, is it going to be my friends or family? And yeah, there's the gamble, you know, do you have good odds? I'm terrible at gambling, so I would never press that button. Right? But she's like, could it be my friends or family that die? And Decim has to be honest. He's like, well, yes, it could be, but there are 7 billion people. What are the odds? But it's still an odd, right? And not only that, but there's that selfishness aspect to it. But then she realizes, what if one of the people that I exchanged my life for is one of the people that the others died to save, that they could come in contact with again one day if they're reincarnated? She's like, what if I do that? What if I take that away from them? And then the idea of what gives me the right? I took my own life. It's my fault. I did it. It's a very anti-suicide episode. So for an episode being called Suicide Tour, because it takes her on a tour of her life post-committing suicide, when I saw the title Suicide Tour, I was half convinced that Oculus was going to kill everybody. or make all the arbiters kill themselves or something. I really had the idea that this series was going to take a very, very dark turn. Thankfully, it didn't, right? But what I love about it is that it's like a very anti-suicide episode. Like, don't throw away your life because look at what happened. Like, you know, she threw away her life, and yes, her mother's sad, and she realized that she didn't understand her mom at all, and she didn't try to understand her. Instead, she took her own life rather than taking the time to understand someone else. And that's kind of a beautiful message out of this, being like, don't take your life. One, you're not alone. Like, her mom was there for her and is still there for her after her death. And we assume the dad's at work, but it's like her mom was there for her. And so I love that there's that message of don't take your life because there is somebody there for you. You just may not realize it. And maybe they're not articulating it like they should be, but they are still there. And so I loved that message, but I was like, oh my God, like it's such a sad moment, right? So let's go through this episode. Oh my goodness. So yeah, so Decim wants to get her memories. He wants to get her memories so he can recreate the world that she described in episode 11. And what I love about it is everything we see in this episode from her flashback are all things from her memories in the last episode. So Decim just recreates it based on what he sees. Okay, glad that Nona dodged the bullet, dodged Oculus. I'm like, good job. I was like, yeah, she's like, you don't get to see everything. I love that. I love that this series ends with Nona being on the up and up. She's like keeping Oculus in his place, right? She's like, no. Keeping him in his place. Don't let him use that two-sided lotus to get everything, right? And so the idea of dummies is such a fascinating thing. He's like, we have to have our arbiters be dummies. They have to be constructed. And the way they're constructed, though, is fascinating. So he says, we have to have our arbiters be dummies. And she's like, well, that's only to suit you, right? And he's like, what is it that you're after? And she's like, would you like to know? We're able to change. You mean arbiters that possess human emotions? Yeah. She's like, that's right. We're not just mere dummies. So see, she suggests that maybe she has human emotions in her too. Maybe Nona does as well. We know that Decim does. We know that for sure. But she suggests the idea that we're not just dummies. We are able to think and have a consciousness. And Oculus is like, really? He's like, that's so ridiculous. You made my flowers shrivel. He's like, there's no point in talking to you now. He's like, we're all dummies, myself included. So yeah, Oculus admits, he's like, I was constructed from a dummy just like you all were. Which makes I like that this series doesn't necessarily give us all the answers. So it makes us wonder, like, is there a being above Oculus? He thinks that person's not there anymore. How did they get there then? So, you know, there's the whole chicken and the egg conversation. Well, then how did they get there? I like this series it doesn't explain every little nook and cranny. It makes you have to think about it and try to come up with your own conclusions. So is the idea that he thinks that God's just not watching, or does he think God doesn't care? But whatever the case may be, Oculus has assumed command in this position and thinks that even though they're all... But it's funny because he says, we're all dummies, myself included. And I'm like, but you're controlling the situation. You know, that would require some emotion. He says, you see now, don't you? What is it that we're made of? And he says, the souls of those cast into the void. That is interesting. So he suggests that the ones that are reincarnated go back to the world of living and are allowed to live. But we ourselves as arbiters, we are the souls of those who did not get reincarnated, that were cast into the void. That's fascinating. So by all means, you could end up becoming an arbiter one day. By all means, right? Or Mayu's soul could be transported into an arbiter. That's fascinating too, because it's this idea that there is a reincarnation, but the arbiters don't get to live or die. It's kind of like, that is your hell. You don't get to live or die. You get to judge others who have lived, you know, on instead of you. That's creepy, right? The idea that the arbiters are just people who fell into the void, which adds to the fact that they're emotionless, right? They, you know, if they're cast into the void, there was probably a reason for it, so they don't have any emotions anymore attached, right? So damn. So if the idea of Decim and Nona were souls from the void too, kind of explains a lot of their personalities, right? He says we're those that were cast in the void, on top of which we are. So we've come, as long as the same blood flows through the arbiters, trying to pull any of this nonsense won't change anything. He's like, you can give us human emotions, but it doesn't change the fact that we can't do anything about it. We're stuck here. So as long as we're arbiters, which we always will be, that's not going to ever change. But for a brief moment, Decim, like, regained some of that humanity. For a brief moment, was able to share that understanding with her, with Chiyuki, and it was the most beautiful thing ever. I was like, I wanted to look up all the fan art after that moment. I was like, I need more of them, please. And him saying, you'll see soon enough. There's a lot of things that are foreshadowed in this episode, that knowing it's the last one, it's like, okay, well, that's not going anywhere, so what do we do with that? And I like, again, that they left it open, where if they wanted to make more of the series, they could. And he takes Chiyuki down to the bottom. I like that Clavis is kind of just a dummy. He just does whatever is told of him, right? Does whatever is told of him, and that's it. But we go to Chiyuki reliving her past and reliving what the world seems to be like. So the question is, is her mom really like that in the present, or was that just part of the illusion? Is that just what Decim thought Chiyuki's mom would do? There is a question, because for a minute you kind of question reality, like, are they in reality, are they not? And you find out they weren't. They were in the lower level the entire time, and it was all a test. So there is kind of a sadness there, knowing that we don't know for sure if that's how Chiyuki's mom was really reacting in reality to her death, but Decim assumes that that's the case. That's kind of what he imitates, right? And we find out the Chevo dolls were made by her mom and given to her. And he keeps them in his pockets, and she holds them in there. I love that we tied back the theme of the story, that Chevo was about a girl and a guy who could not understand one another, but the boy tried to understand her and reach her. And that's kind of been a metaphor for the entire series. And at the very end, they finally get to understand and reach each other, and it's the most beautiful thing, and it's so sweet. But yeah, what a, like, this whole, like, I was wondering if Chiyuki, going through the motions and seeing all of this, was realizing, like, that she kind of threw her life away when she shouldn't have. Like, her seeing everything in the house and realizing, I had a great life. She's like, despite me losing what I was passionate in, I had a wonderful life. And it is kind of like that. Like, It's a Wonderful Life is one of my favorite stories. And I love that series because the main character, he has this moment of doubt and despair and thinks that his world is crumbling and it would have been better if he'd never been there. But then through the course of the movie, he realizes, no, your life impacts so many others and it is valuable. And he kind of realizes the purpose of his being. And here, she kind of seems like she's going through a moment of George Bailey, where she's questioning, you know, like, why did I take my life? Why did I do this? Like, I left these people behind that cared about me. And it's so freaking sad. Like, I didn't have much to react on in the episode because I was just like, oh God, this is heartbreaking. And then Decim gives her the option. He says that there are 7,000 people in this 7 billion populated world that pass away, like, every minute, every second, every hour. So he's like, people pass away all the time. Some people think it's unfair, but he's like, it just happens so frequently. And it makes them all seem insignificant, right? He's like, so Decim tries to frame it as, you know, these lives are all insignificant. So if you want to come back to life, just exchange yourself out with one of them. And it's so tempting. It is so tempting the way that he frames it. Like, well, everyone's life's inconsequential, so who cares if you just take the place of one person? Like, it's just one person. Go on. And just frames it like that. And then you have the mom crying, and Chiyuki just feels so horrible about everything that's happened, and she just wants to go back and talk to her mom again. But it's the idea that, you know, she made this choice. She didn't understand her mom, and she didn't realize her mom was trying to understand her, you know, and she had said before that it was wrong for people to understand one another, but then she realizes her mom was trying to do that all along, and she shut her out, and now she sees the consequence of that, and she regrets it. And it's such a well built up moment, and I love that the last episode builds into this so perfectly, and it's like, oh my God. And she almost presses that button. And she says, I just didn't have a choice, did I? But she does have a choice. And that's kind of the big thing. You always have a choice. And she thinks that she gets kind of into a Shimada moment where she's like, well, I don't have a choice, do I? Like, Shimada thought he didn't have a choice either. But you do. And she had a choice. She chose to take her life, so she doesn't get that back. You know, it's one of those decisions. It's memento mori. It has to happen. And you can just tell that Decim feels really sad. And she was like, I want us to understand one another. She's like, I realize I was wrong. And that's when she sees everyone from the past and those decisions, and she drops it. She's like, I can't press it. She's like, as much as I want to. And Decim's like, why not? And her crying, she's like, everyone has feelings for someone. And I love that, like, she's like, Miss Chiyuki, they have nothing to do with you. And that's the thing, you know, Decim's trying to, you know, point out the objective details. Like, those people don't have any connection to you, so why should that matter? And she's like, I know that. That's what's so frustrating. She's like, I know. But even if they have nothing to do with me, somewhere, there's definitely someone who cherishes them. And that's when Decim, like, it gets him. He's like, he realizes that she figured it out. He realizes that she figured everything out, that she made the right decision. That's the moment that it all hits him. And I'm like, no. She's like, someone just like my mom. Everyone has someone like that. I love it. And it's like all the human emotions, like, grip him, right? She's like, I still want to talk to my mother. And that's when she's so sad. And I just love that Decim comes to that realization where he's just like, oh my God, like, yeah, like gripping his heart, those emotions. He gets what she's saying. I love it. It's so dramatic, and I love it. And that's when she regrets not valuing her life or trying to understand. And she's so sad. And that's when she's like, I can't do it. So if you want me to press the button, then press it. She's like, I can't. And the world just cracks around them that it was all... And Decim crying, damn it! Decim crying for her. And then, like, yeah, it breaks him from being an arbiter for a second. For a brief second, he quits being an arbiter and connects with her. Ugh. Like him crying, being like him feeling so bad for her and forcing her to go through that trial and realizing her decision and realizing why she made the decision, right? Why the judgment matters. Like, oh God, the animation's gorgeous. Like, it's just everything breaking up and all the memories. I love everything breaks into the memories that were like the mosaic of crystals. It's all so beautiful. And then Decim collapsing, yeah. He deceived her and he felt so bad for doing it. And he's like, I'm putting you through all this difficulty. Yeah. And she's like, oh, so this was part of the judgment, huh? And he's like, yeah. And he says, it hurts. This is sorrow, isn't it? This is suffering. Yeah. I just wanted to know you better. Oh! I wanted them to say I love you at the end. I wanted her and him to say that they love each other at the very end. But I think it's understood, right? We both get the idea they both loved each other. And it's understood at the end when he smiles at her. He's like, I'm sorry for me to do this. Oh. And then he's like, I'm an arbiter. It's my job. I'm sorry I put you through this. And her, like, going over and hugging him, like, and she brushes back the bangs from his eyes. She brushes him back so he can see her, and she's like, oh, you don't have to apologize. And she's like, I get it. Oh. Yeah, and him just, like, hugging her and crying. Like, I needed both of them to have this moment, and it's so good. And, of course, Hawks VA just selling it. And him just getting to cry and her being like, yep. Like, that's, like, they get to commiserate in that one moment, and it's so beautiful. And then, of course, Oculus and Nona get to see that on the screen. They get to see it all go down. And she's like, Decim. And he's like, what did you do to him? She's like, I just made him conduct a judgment with a human, that's all. He says, the closer an arbiter comes to becoming human, the more difficult the judgment becomes, and the more it's accompanied by suffering. Because, yeah, then they realize, like, what a horrible... I mean, I get to an extent why Oculus doesn't want them to have emotions involved, because he's like, then the arbiters are going to suffer because they're going to realize, you know, they're stuck in this forever, constantly living through people's greatest regrets and, you know, having to tell them whether they're going to the void or getting reincarnated. And Nona says, well, humans can't judge humans, right? He says, if you know that, then why did you do this? Just because judging humans may give rise to difficulties doesn't mean it's right to pass random judgment. Nona's saying, I know why humans cannot judge humans, right? She's like, I get that. But to have an arbiter have no emotions at all and not be able to understand humanity is just letting them pass a random judgment. She's like, that's not fair either. That's not doing any service or disservice at all. She's like, that's not correct either. So she's like, the way that you're doing isn't right. She's like, I get why you don't want them to be humans as arbiters, but not having any emotions at all isn't the right way to go. And Oculus is like, what reason is there to make the arbiters suffer deliberately? And that kind of, what is the point of judgment that isn't accompanied by suffering? She's like, that goes back to the whole games. She's like, if you don't think the arbiters should have to suffer when they pass judgment, how is it fair that they make the participants in the games suffer before they're judged? She's like, that doesn't make sense either. She's like, if you're going to make the participants suffer, you have to understand that suffering too to make a better judgment. So yeah, I love this little subtle back and forth between them. It's great. And just showing like the grass spreading through it. And he's like, the point, to suffer yet stand firm. That's what it is to live, isn't it? Like to keep on going despite the suffering. To stand firm despite suffering is what it is to live. That's just, it's so good. It's so good. And he's like, to live. He's like, the word live is used by those who are able to die. I love it. So creepy when he like gets up next to her. He's like, how can you talk about living when you can't live? You cannot die if you are not even alive. Even if they become more human, the fact remains that they are dummies. And she's like, you're wrong. We live in the present. I love that line. And he just kind of looks at her like he doesn't quite understand what she's saying. But she's like, no. She says, you say that we cannot live unless we are able to die. And she's like, then what is this existence we have right now? Like, what are we doing right now? We're interacting with people. We're in a setting. We have a soul. We are composed of a soul, and we have a body of some kind, even if it's a dummy. She's like, how are we not living? So there's this really interesting, like, existential question that's going around because Decim said there's the argument by Ginty. Ginty says that people don't realize, he's like, they don't try to live until they die, and their lives are defined by their deaths. And then Decim is arguing that no, we die because we live. But then Nona says, no, we're alive in the present no matter what. If we're here in this reality, that makes us living. So it's all these like different philosophies about life and death being like thrown into the mix. And Oculus is just like, what are you talking about? We're alive. How can we be alive? And Nona's like, I'm just, saying pragmatically, we're here, we're existing. So our existence proves our life. It's fascinating. I love it. I love that, just him cocking his head. I thought when he cocked his head, he was going to like do something crazy, but instead she leaves him in this existential state. And so Decim tells her that the dummies are those disposed of after their judgment is over and their souls are removed. Normally no one's permitted here. And she says, is this where I'm going? And he says, no. And she's like, oh, thanks. He keeps her body. He doesn't leave her there in the graveyard. He keeps the dummy of her and props it up in the bar. So it doesn't just sit there. He keeps it there as a memento. Oh! Humans try to live all the more in the present after they die. Those are the kinds of people that you respect. Yeah. And then he takes the dolls with him. And then, yeah. And then Clavis, like, takes them back. And so meanwhile, like, I like that Oculus hasn't quite figured out. He's like, Nona, you seem to be quite taken with death, haven't you? I I think he's just trying to figure out what she was saying. He's like, you know, Oculus can't understand. He's like, what is going on? I like that they leave it open to what could happen to her and him. Like I feel like they're like in a chess match with each other on what the meaning of life and death is. And I'm like, oh my God. I love it. I love where the series is taking it. But the leaving behind when Chiyuki has to go was so sad. That her leaving him, and he's like, are you glad that you lived? And she's like, yes. She finally, you know, is able to admit that she is. And she wants Decim to help them realize that they loved life as well. And she's like, you need to smile more. And he tries to smile and force it, but it doesn't work. And she's like, well, this is it. And he says, yes, off you go. And she's like, bye-bye. And I wanted them to say I love you so badly, but I think it's understood, right? Especially when she has tears in her eyes and she looks at him, and when he smiles back at her very softly, and he remembers her and like has that little montage of seeing her throughout the season. I love that he is able, like, his eyes like gleam up, and then he's able to like give her this soft smile that's genuine. Yeah, at that point, I'm like, no, that's as much of an I love you as you can get. Like, her eyes sparkle like Mayu's, and it's like, damn it, it's so good. And then she's able to smile and go. And the elevator goes upward, so she gets reincarnated. So I'm glad we got that established. And then we see the 2 new people arrive. But then we go back to Clavis. And he says, oh, where's your cat? And he's like, she doesn't come back anymore. I like the idea that maybe the cat didn't like how he reacted to Mayu and it just left him. That maybe the cat was like, nope, you don't get to see me anymore. And then Clavis is like, well, pour me a drink. You seem like you need company. And he's like, what are you doing here? And that's when he's like, who cares? Let's drink. And then he gives the little doll, the new doll that he's made, has her on it. So this whole time, just like Decim made the dummies of the people that he cared about into memoriams there in QuinDecim, then Ginty's doing the same thing where he made the dolls out of the people that he cared about. Because, yeah, that kind of is the bittersweet thing about this world, is that these people that come through, Mayu and Chiyuki, they don't get to stay. That's kind of the bittersweet thing about it. They don't get to stay in the end. They have to move on. They've died, they have to move on. That's the bittersweet truth of it all. But they get memorialized with Ginty, with Decim, showing to like remind them of how much they cared about them. And so there is something to that. So it's like, it's so bittersweet, right? So bittersweet. And then meanwhile, we have like the cheese platter and the tarts. Your boy did. What are we going to do now? Oh, so they're talking about Decim. I love that Castra and Queen and Nona just have like a girls' day, like eating their like charcuterie board and having their wine. There are so many arbiters. Yeah, what are we going to do? Should we retain the memories of death again and forward them? Oh. No, let's see what happens. We don't have to do anything. Flowerhead has his eye on her. What is she doing? So let's just behave ourselves. So yeah, so there's this idea of the arbiters maybe like getting back some of their memories too, so they can make judgments. Interesting. I'm curious, like all the interpretations with this, and like what is it? Just feels like it's setting up Nona and Oculus having a chess game with one another for how the arbiters are going to judge death from here on in, which is fascinating, right? Fascinating. And she says the rules. 1, arbiters cannot quit making judgments. They cannot do that, for that is the reason why they exist. And then we see the poor ponytail holder with Mayu. 2, arbiters cannot experience death, because that would bring them closer to being human, to understanding it. 3, arbiters cannot feel emotions, for they are dummies. And then Oculus grabbing the sun with his hands. For arbiters may not work hand in hand with life. Ooh. And he drops the sun on the planets. For that will ruin them. So there's the idea that they have to exist. They have to pass judgment. They cannot have emotions because they're dummies, supposedly. That's the most offhand rule. But the life and death thing, they can't experience death because it would make them too human, which would interfere with their judgments. They can't work hand in hand with life because it would cause them suffering, which would ruin them. So it's just like Oculus, they're all these rules are just begging to be bended and twisted. And it's like Oculus and Nona are in this little struggle of how can we change things? How can we play with the rules? What do we do with all this? How will Decim evolve the rules as well based on his interactions with Chiyuki? What do we do with that? And then we have the two people show up and Decim smiling. Decim smiling as we see the doll next to him. Yeah. Yep. And the doll of Chiyuki there smiling too. And then we have all of them together. And I like that at the very end, there when they do the ending of her with his hands, like he's there and she's in the dummy and is holding the two dolls. Like the callback to the LP that she's still there all along. How about that? That was a really good series. I really enjoyed this series a lot. I can't wait to talk about it in the live stream after I see all y'all's comments. I still can't wait to watch the audio drama. I hope we get more with Chiyuki and Decim. But this ended a lot better than I thought it was going to end. It leaves things open-ended, but I was expecting the worst. I was expecting there to be like just a horrible trauma. And there wasn't. It was a lot more refreshing of an ending than I expected. So, yay. But I'm really pleased with this ending. I hope y'all are too. I'm super curious to know your thoughts down below. But, oh my gosh. I hope y'all enjoyed Death Parade as much as I did. We still have the audio drama next week and then the live stream after that. So, we'll just have to wait and see, right? But in the meantime, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and thank you all for watching Death Parade with me. I'll see y'all again soon with more reactions.